Your excuses sound logical because you repeat them, not because they are true, not because they are deep, not because they are fair. They sound logical because you've practiced them, over and over, quietly, sometimes out loud. You don't hear them anymore. You just feel the relief they give you, the relief of not moving, the relief of not choosing. You call it being realistic. You call it being careful. You call it knowing yourself. But listen closely. Every excuse you use has the same shape. It delays. It softens responsibility. It shifts the weight away from you. You don't say you won't. You say you can't. You don't say you're afraid. You say the timing is wrong. You don't say you chose comfort. You say circumstances forced your hand. That language matters because it protects you. You don't repeat excuses to convince others. You repeat them to convince yourself. That's the part you avoid admitting. The first time you said them, they felt weak. You felt the gap. You felt the lie brushing against something real. So you said them again. Smoother this time. Less resistance. Repetition did the rest. Now they feel solid. They feel reasonable. They feel earned. That's how self-deception works. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, politely. You don't need to believe an excuse completely. You only need to believe it enough to stop. And stopping is the goal. You stop before effort. You stop before risk. You stop before exposure. You stop where it still feels safe to explain yourself. You tell yourself you're waiting. But waiting for what? Permission. Certainty. A version of life that asks less of you. You say you're not ready. But ready for what? Discomfort. Judgment. The possibility that you try and nothing changes. That's the part your excuses are hiding. They are not about logic. They are about fear that learned how to speak clearly. You don't panic. You rationalize. You don't run. You walk away calmly. You don't collapse. You stall. And because it looks controlled, you trust it. You confuse familiarity with truth. You confuse calmness with correctness. Just because a thought doesn't shake you doesn't mean it's honest. Your excuses sound measured, balanced, thought through. Of course they do. They've had time to evolve. Each time reality pressured you, they adapted. Each time something inside you pushed back, they refined their tone. Now they don't feel like excuses, they feel like conclusions. That's dangerous, because conclusions close doors. They end movement without looking like avoidance. You tell yourself, this is just how things are, that this is who you are, that this is what makes sense. But sense is easy to manufacture when the goal is comfort. You don't question the excuse that protects you. You defend it. You get irritated when it's challenged. Not because it's strong, but because it's fragile. If it were truly solid, it wouldn't need defending. You say you're being honest with yourself. But honesty doesn't need repetition. Truth doesn't require rehearsal. Excuses do. That's why they show up instantly, before silence, before reflection. They rush in to fill the gap, because if you paused long enough, something else might surface. Something less polished, something harder to explain, a knowing. Not loud, not dramatic, just there. And you don't want to sit with that. So you repeat what you already know how to say. You mistake clarity for courage. But clarity without action is just a polished delay. You keep telling yourself the same story, with small edits, better wording, enough to feel like growth, enough to avoid change. You say you've thought about it a lot. That doesn't mean you've faced it. Thinking is safe. Facing is not. Your excuses give you a clean image of yourself. Reasonable, thoughtful, unlucky, misunderstood. They keep you from seeing the simpler truth, that you choose what costs less in the moment, not because you're weak, but because repetition made it automatic. You didn't wake up one day and decide to lie to yourself. You practiced it gradually. Now it feels like common sense, but common sense isn't neutral. It's just what you've heard the most, and the voice you hear the most is your own. You don't need more insight. You already see the pattern. You just refuse to call it what it is. Because naming it removes the cover. As long as it's logical, you don't have to look at the cost. The cost isn't dramatic, it's quiet. It's time passing without friction. It's days that blur without resistance. It's potential that never has to prove itself. You don't feel the loss sharply. That's why you tolerate it. If it hurt more, you'd be forced to respond. So your excuses dull the edge. They turn urgency into patience. They turn discomfort into planning. They keep everything just soft enough. And you accept that softness as wisdom. But deep down, you know the difference. You can feel when you're explaining instead of acting. You can feel when you're convincing instead of deciding. That tension hasn't gone away. You've just learned how to talk over it. One day, repetition stops working. Not suddenly, not loudly. You just notice the excuses don't feel as convincing anymore. They still sound logical, but they feel empty. And that's when silence gets uncomfortable. Because there's nothing left to hide behind. Just you. And the things you avoided naming. And that quiet doesn't accuse you. It doesn't argue. It waits.